Welcome to Minnesota Legislative Report, our region's longest-running public affairs program. Lawmakers from northeastern Minnesota are joining us today for a recap of the week's activities at the state capitol. This is your opportunity to call or email your legislative questions and have them answered live on the air. Minnesota Legislative Report starts now.
Hello and welcome to Minnesota Legislative Report. I'm your host, Tony Sertich. State legislature is closing in on deadlines that will impact what issues remain alive this session. Viewers, tonight is your chance to join in on the conversation. Email or call in with questions for the lawmakers that represent you. To ask a question, dial the phone number on your screen, or you can also email your questions to ask@pbsnorth.org. Joining us in studio today are Representative Spencer Igo, a Republican from Wabana Township, representing District 7A. And joining him is Representative Roger Skraba, a Republican from Ely, representing District 3A. Welcome, Representative Igo and Skraba. Great to have you back in studio.
Thanks for having us.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
So here we are. We're getting towards the end of session. Now, legislators can introduce as many bills or ideas as they want during the session. But then there are deadlines that really funnel your work, and you're getting close to some of those deadlines. And so we'll start, Representative Igo, with you to just talk about, for the viewers at home, the process of how we winnow down to get to an end of session and decisions with these deadlines.
Yeah, so absolutely. Again, we're third deadline this week. So the deadlines really is a way for us to kind of, well, what are we at, Roger? 6,000 bills or something right now? It's to get us that kind of final list of what we're going to be moving forward with. So the first and second deadlines happened a few weeks ago. We were having very long committee hearings, usually 2 a day, to get through a bunch of bills to kind of give us a good palette to work with. And now this week we'll kind of come together, finally have those last hearings on those final bills that'll create usually the omnibus bills. So those need to be heard by Friday. So it should be a busy week, and we'll just kind of see what happens with it.
So once Friday gets here, those ideas that are kind of in the mix are the ones that move forward, and everything else is basically dead for the year. Is that true, Representative Skraba?
Unless it's a spending, if it's a bonding bill, we can have some leeway to work on that. But for the most part, that is, when it's done after Friday, if you haven't introduced a bill, it takes some extraordinary effort to get it, to hear it. I mean, it can be done, but it's not something that's normal. We've well over 10,000 bills in the last 2 years, well north of that. So we've heard enough.
Yeah. and so if viewers, you call in or email in today, we might have a sense of this is something that's still alive, or this is something that probably won't happen this year one way or another. So the big issue generally for this second year of a 2-year session that you all are involved in is the capital investment or bonding bill. And this is where the state borrows money to invest in infrastructure projects with regional or statewide significance generally. And so let's spend a little bit of time talking about this. Representative Skraba, you sit on the Capital Investment Committee, and so you've done a lot of work prior to the legislature meeting in session, and now the heavy lifting is happening in that committee. Can you talk a bit about how this works, how bonding works, and maybe talk about how you spent your summer, which was a while ago, but this all plays into how you build a bill that can garner support?
Very, very much so. Think of capital investments, bonding, as a credit card. And the state has the ability to borrow so much each year. And it's based on revenues, it's based on a formula. This year they came to us, and after last year's record, phenomenal, over $2 billion in bonding. This year is more normal. They came in and said, you have $830 million. And the governor has his bill, the legislature has their bill, the Senate and the House. What happens is, prior to all of this, each community, whoever, and normally, like the governor this year said he wanted to focus on water and wastewater, not so much community centers and things like that. So as a member of the bonding committee, the bonding chair, Representative Fu Lee from, I believe, St. Paul, Fu put together a trip. We went 6 weeks this summer. We go Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday of the week. And we get in a bus in St. Paul and we travel around the state. One week we're in northwestern Minnesota, the next one northeast, the next one north central, the next one southwest, southeast, and then back in the metro in November. We got done in November. We started this in August. So it's, you go to all the projects. Each member or each community, the member sometimes is even part of it. In the beginning, each community just says, you know, MPCA came, this year's big thing was
Minnesota Pollution Control Agency.
Minnesota
We don't do
Pollution-
acronyms on the show,
sorry.
so there
Minnesota
you go.
Pollution Control Agency came out and said we're going to change the way we do this wastewater, and because there's so much salt in the water because of water and these issues, so these communities down in southern Minnesota had to change their wastewater treatment facilities. Well, it's not $1 million project, you know, it's $5, $6, $8 million per project, and they became priority this year because we're trying to keep our water safe and clean. So what happens is we get a tour of all these communities that said, hey, we need help. We can't do this alone. A town, I mean, we've had some towns of 60 where we have to build a 6-mile pipe to pump their effluent to another spot, and they can't afford that. They just can't afford it. So the state comes in and says, raise your rates to what the max you can pay, and we'll take care of the rest. So that's one aspect of bonding, the way we do that. We get that, and we did a lot of that this year, a lot. And water treatment, same thing. We also do, for our listeners and our people, the Gitchigami Trail. We do Mesabi Trail. We do different public entities that each community in itself, in my opinion, shouldn't have to pay for. It's really a regional project. It attracts people here, and we benefit from it because we live here. But at the same time, people from the metro area they fall over themselves to come up north to be with us, and we have all these amenities for them that everybody helped pay for. So I mean, and there are various other reasons, things that in capital investments, I could stay here for an hour, but I don't need to talk about that. But this is my second year, and it's been the trips that I took last summer. If you ever want to learn about Minnesota, go on a bonding tour. You will learn intimately what digest really quick. We're in a nursing home for 34 people. There's 33 in the building only because they can't get that last room fixed. There's one shower and one bathtub for 33 people. You know, and I'm like, what? It's 2023. This is the best we can do for our people in the state. So things like that you see, and it's like, we need to fix that. We need to help these communities because they don't have the means. It's in one of the poorest counties in Minnesota. So you learn, you know, what's your metal? What are you made of? How much of this can you take? You know, so I use that as my measuring stick. You know, I will make sure they get money. That's my goal. Is I want that thing fixed. It has to. It's just sad to see, to know that it's happening, and I have an opportunity to help those people. So, but we see things. It's just phenomenal.
Yeah. So legislature goes on the road firsthand, gets to see what's going on in communities, hosting folks up here as well. Representative Igo, I'm sure you have a list of projects that you are supporting for your community in our region. Can you take a bit of time to talk about what you're hopeful to see being either in the discussion or hopefully a part of a capital investment bill impacting northeastern Minnesota?
Yes, I think Roger kind of hit it off great. I mean, and the governor has good priorities. It should be water and infrastructure right now, and that's really what a lot of our projects are. All over the range in northeastern Minnesota. You know, the range delegation, along with other members outside of it, most of our bonding projects that we have put in are, you know, a water project in Hibbing, a water project in Floodwood, a water project in some townships. I mean, that's the things we're working on, and it's infrastructure that's going to help those communities that don't have the means, don't have the tax base to do so. And that's kind of been the big thing I've been advocating for in the bonding bill this year. You know, I think last year we saw a bunch of one-time monies that were used. It was a record bonding deal, but I think this time we need to return to what bonding's supposed to be. As a member of leadership, that's kind of the conversations I've been having, is saying, let's do this. It should be a bipartisan bill. Bonding's a good thing if you're taking care of infrastructure and taking care of people, because when we come into a community like Hibbing, which is one of the projects I'm working on, and we help them with their water infrastructure, you know, we lift that community up by not putting that cost on the people that live there. And it gives them more means to have more prosperity to invest in themselves. And I think it's really important that we keep that perspective when we talk about bonding, because that's how we can, lift up lives of Minnesotans outside of our region too.
Great. And so the bill, as Representative Skraba said, is really borrowing or putting it on the state's credit card. And in order to do that, you need a supermajority or more than traditionally it takes to pass. And in both the Senate and the House, that would mean it would take bipartisan support to get this done. So Representative Igo, in order to win your support, what are some of the things you're looking for?
I was going to say the $1 million question, but I think it's like the $830 million question, right? Again, kind of go back to what I just said. I want, if the bill is strictly roads, water, bridges, infrastructure, and actually helping people and helping communities that have tax-based issues, you're going to have my support. I just don't want to see $27 million for a startup nonprofit like we did last year. We need to actually invest in people, invest in communities that need it. And that's how you're going to get not just a bipartisan bill by a hairline margin. You'll get massive support if we can put together a bill like that. So that's what I've been working on since last summer as we came into session, is let's leave the partisan stuff at the side, focus on what bonding's for, and we're going to get a good bill.
Representative Skraba, what are you looking for to gain your support?
Well, it's pretty hard for me not to support this bill. A majority of the projects that we're seeing, I sit on the committee, so twice a week we have people come in and 2-3 minutes per group. I mean, we're hearing, $200 million a day worth of projects people are looking for, that sort of thing. And you're like, okay, we know we can't fund everything. That's a fact. So, like Representative Igo said, I'm gonna kind of defer. I'd like to see more infrastructure, but I do realize that some of these. I have a project in Little Fork that is a RV park in a gravel pit, and the water. Part of the deal is getting the water cleaned and all that. It's all part of, and it's a trail between Crane Lake and Little Fork. So it's like, for a small community like Little Fork, that's huge. It's a big deal for us to sit there. And between Senator Hochschild and myself, we sit down and we try to find which projects are going to be good for our communities that we think we can get across the line. Mm-hmm. And last year's bill was just different. So this year, Representative Erdahl, the Republican lead, is like, this is more like it. This is the way, so I'm looking forward to seeing the finish line, the finished product, getting to that. Last year, we really weren't a big part of it. Leadership did most of it. This year, Representative Lee, Chair Lee, said, we're going to be more integral in what's going to happen. So,
I hear cautious optimism by both of you that something will get done here. But as a reminder, nothing needs to get done. So unlike last year, when the state is responsible to pass a budget in order to fund government, they fund it for 2 years. Mm-hmm. And so really, this doesn't need to get done. It sounds like a want, definitely, though, across the board. And I'm hearing some cautious optimism here.
Well, and like I said, just anything can happen. As especially we get into these closing weeks, and what's that final bill going to look like? And how are we going to see, like, DNR agency projects, for example? How are they going to factor into it? Where are they going to count? What side of the aisle is going to work on that? And again, a lot can happen. Yeah. So it's cautious optimism, but at the same time, I think there is some mutual understanding between both parties that if we focus on the infrastructure, the bonding bill will happen.
Okay. Well, if you have specific questions about this bonding bill or any projects, please call or email in. We have our first question from a viewer in Hibbing, wondering to both of you, and we'll start with you, Representative Skraba, will you support an equal rights Minnesota constitutional ballot initiative to allow citizens to vote on an amendment to the Minnesota Constitution? Women have been waiting over 100 years for equality. Equal rights amendment to the Constitution.
I would support to let the people vote. Absolutely, that's something I wouldn't deny anyone the right to vote on an amendment. The way this amendment is written, they changed the wording. It's not the amendment from 100 years ago. It's a different amendment right now. We have.
What's different about it?
I don't know exactly because I'm not in that. The colleagues that I have, they're telling us to be cautious about the form that this is coming in. if it comes in a form that, again, this is my expertise is environment and natural resources, but on whole, I support this. I just want to see what the language is to see if we can support the language that it's going to come in. And quite honestly, I don't know what it is.
Representative Vigo, do you have any more information on what's being considered right now?
Yeah, Representative Skraba kind of hit it there. I mean, so the way we see the language getting crafted right now, and right now, I don't know if the new language even moved through any of the committees yet this year. So again, going back to that deadline conversation, it would have to basically be heard by the end of the week if we're going to see it move anymore.
So what is then the current language that is being considered?
There's a current language in the Senate that had some, basically Minnesota took what we're seeing across the country and added some language that I don't think most Minnesotans are aware of yet. It kind of goes into the weeds a little bit on the terms of reproductive rights. That changes things a little bit. That is usually what the conversation hasn't been for the last 100 years. So I think there's Republicans and Democrats both looking at the language going, maybe this needs to be fine-tuned. So when it goes to putting an amendment before the people of Minnesota, absolutely, I think that's the way we need to move amendments like that, especially for our Constitution. But I think there needs to be more work done on it right now because there's being changes introduced to the language. So I don't think we're going to probably see it move this year. If anything, it'll probably be another year. And the legislature is supposed to move slow, especially when we're talking about constitutional amendments.
Now, and just so that our viewers at home and I'm clear about this, so this is really to codify equal rights for women in, is it the state constitution or is it the national constitution? Because I know other states are passing similar provisions. And so is this specific to Minnesota or is this more of a national push? Do either of you know that?
So again, like Roger, my expertise is more on the energy side of things, natural resources, economic development. So I'm not as privy to this because I haven't been in the conversations. But as I'm aware, it's a national movement to help on ratifying some stuff at the national level, but it's also at the state side level too.
Okay. Well, keep those questions coming in.
Yes.
Thank you very
Great question.
much.
Thanks to my constituent from Hibbing.
There you go. So I'm going to get back to the questions in a second. So the other piece that's going on this legislative session is you're sitting with a current surplus of resources for this budget year, and the state projects out and forecasts out if there's money available. And so the governor also brought forward, as one does, a list of proposals to potentially fund above and beyond what last year's budget was. And once again, this doesn't need to give it passed because you already have an existing budget in place. And I know that the legislature has their priorities. One of the biggest priorities that the governor put forward in his supplemental budget was funding for emergency medical services, ambulance services. I know a big issue in greater Minnesota, there was a committee that was formed that went around and so can you talk a bit about the need, if you feel there is a need for some additional state funding to help out our rural ambulance services? Representative Skraba, do you want to go first, please?
Yeah, I went to the first meeting. They had Mountain Iron, this organization, the group, the legislative group. What the governor proposed, I think, was $16 million. 6 was for an experiment, and 10, I didn't break it down enough because it's not even close to what we need right now. It's not even a Band-Aid. It's identifying the problem, like, yes, there's an issue. We all know it's an issue. I think it's going to take some negotiating and what you negotiate with to get more. The organization identified $120 million. If we had one-time funding, it would make everyone in the state whole, that is in a hole. I represent International Falls. They're about $250,000 a year going in the hole. Mm-hmm. So we're trying to bring them back to being whole. Ely goes about $120,000, $150,000 every year in the hole. We're going to try to make them whole. Grand Marais, same issue. Silver Bay, all these small communities, Big Fork, they're like Big Fork does an okay job, but now they're losing money. City of Orr makes money because it's all volunteer. They don't have any. They're not paying EMTs or paramedics. So it's a model. It needs a big discussion, and a really big discussion about what is the future. What do you expect? I mean. I think what's going to end up happening is at some point we're all going to have to pay more. I keep using the example of in St. Louis County we have a solid waste fee, $85 per parcel, because We want clean water, clean air, clean everything, and the solid waste fee is part of that. Do we want emergency medical services? Do we want that? How much per parcel would it cost for all of us to pay to have that for everybody?
Sounds like you're advocating, though, for more funding than what even the governor's proposing thus far this session.
Absolutely.
And it sounds like one of the major issues around this is actually the reimbursement rates
From the federal.
Correct.
from the federal government, and so that is impacting as well.
Yep.
So I'll ask you a similar question, but I want to expand this out a little bit more,
Yeah.
is because traditionally these sorts of services are paid for by local property taxes, and so where the state has played in this in the past has been giving local government aid to communities to say, you spend it how you spend it best in your community. It's sounding like this proposal is more above and beyond, and so do you see this funding emergency medical services or ambulance services in local communities as a state responsibility?
So this has been an issue that it didn't just pop up at the end of last session. We've been going to this point, and if you talk to anyone that works in EMS, they've been saying it's been coming for a long time, and now we're here, we've arrived. So this legislation that we're working on to try and get this one-time funding is just that. It's a one-time situation. We need to do something to fix it. But I think Representative Skraba is kind of honest saying we need to start looking at how do we fix it long-term. With only a few weeks left in the legislative session, we can't get there. But I know one thing, that people need to be able to dial 911, and if an ambulance needs to be there to pick them up. And I think there's been a huge discrepancy, when there's a lot of education that needs to happen on EMS, right? When we talk about service areas for some of these ambulance units, right? I mean, we can just use City of Hibbing, for example. The city itself is 190 square miles, right? I mean, that's larger than Ramsey County, which has, 4 or 5 different ambulance services to cover it. Now, sure, there's more people, but it's still the same land area. So, and when you talk about those reimbursements, right? I mean, the Medicare, Medicaid reimbursement, what is it like? Usually only covers 60%.
If that.
If that. And that's a larger conversation. We need to work with our congressional delegation. But even that, I mean, in being real about the situation, those reimbursements for Medicare and Medicaid haven't been touched in almost 2 decades. And with the state of affairs when it comes to those programs, when you start adjusting one, it could mean adjustments for others, which could in itself pop the bubble on that. So we need to think twice, act once. But I think at the local level is where we're going to make an impact. So we're really advocating we need to up that number, get our ambulance services whole, and then this summer meet with the stakeholders. That's leagues of Minnesota cities, our small cities, our large cities, our counties, and find a way that gets everyone on board that we can fund this problem moving forward so that we can keep our people safe. And that's a key role of government, right?
So are there any other funding that you're advocating besides this in supplemental funding this year that you're hoping to see a part of a budget package? We'll start with you, Representative Igo.
Yeah, I mean, when it just comes to this is number one priority. I mean, it was one of the first bills that I signed on to when I got down there. I had multiple meetings across the range about this. We're really seeing it up north here. So really pushing that again. The ask was 120. We're at 16 million. We got to find a way to mess with that formula so that it actually is going to help out and take care of everybody. Because I don't want to see a move to a state where we're having ambulance services closed. It's a scary situation.
Representative Skraba, is there any other funding requests that you're supportive of for this session?
I'm being on capital investments. The supplemental, the governor people have been coming in all week, or last 2 weeks, 3 weeks. Child care came in, and asked for I think like 80 or 90 million, something, and it's like, and I asked the director, I think it's under HHS right now. I can't remember.
Health and Human Services.
Yeah, I think that's where it's at right now. Mm-hmm. And I asked the chair, the head, I said, what about the 1.2 billion we put in the budget last year that you guys got for childcare? How much is going into programming? She kind of looked at me and asked for help from the side. The guy came in, told her, and then she said, none of that money is for programming. And I'm like, so $1.2 billion is not going to go into programming at all? No. And I'm like, okay. So, we're going to put in another, let's say, 200 million. So it's like $1.4 billion into childcare, and 200 million is only going to go to programming in the state. And that frustrates me, And I want to help that because I want that money to go to the people. That's my goal. In the governor's supplemental budget, he's identified things that he wants to see, and for us to do that, it takes a caucus and then another caucus to override that, and that's pretty hard. It's pretty tough. So I'm looking. I would go along with more money for childcare, the EMS. That's easy. Where could we go otherwise? We tried to get some PFA money, some more money into public finance. Sorry.
That's okay.
Yeah, Public Finance Authority. It's where communities go get their money for water, wastewater. The state doesn't write the community a check. It goes through PFA or through DEED, Department of
Employment and
Economic Development.
Yep.
There's different ways for the money to get to the communities.
Yes.
But and that's trust me, it's my second year. It's a learning experience to find how that money gets funneled and where it goes. And when a community calls you up and says, "Hey, I didn't get my money. Where is it?" It's like, hold on, a week later, here's where it is.
And I think it's almost worth mentioning too, right? I mean, when it comes to supplemental spending, I think the one thing that we're seeing, and I'm hearing a lot from my district alone, is how much was spent last year, right? We can't forget that the state budget was increased by 40% and taxes were raised by almost $10 billion. So I think the thing that we need to be looking at right now is how can we streamline what's in place? When we talk childcare, right, none of that went to programming, but how many mandates could we remove or fine tune with stakeholders to make that money go a lot farther, right? I mean, same thing can be applied for education. So I think, especially being in a policy year, what could we do with the budget that's in place if we did those fine tweaks so that the programs could go farther? And I think that's kind of the other angle we need to be looking at with this.
Well, we'll get back to some of those public policy questions and conversation, but first, one of the viewers from Balsam Township wrote in and said, will the representatives support an increase on taconite taxes for local townships? And so let's remind the viewers that production taxes, what they're talking about here, taconite taxes, are what the mining companies pay instead of property taxes. And there's a formula that some of the money goes to counties, some goes to cities and townships, some goes to schools, and then the rest goes to the IRRB, and there's a few other pieces in there. And so this viewer is looking for an increase in taconite taxes to go towards local townships. Who wants to take this one first?
I would ask you to answer because you were the IRRB commissioner.
I'm on this side of the table.
I know. Yes. You can go first or me. Go ahead. It doesn't matter.
So I guess I don't know of any proposals like that right now that are introduced just for townships specifically. Whenever we have conversations about adjusting the taconite tax and how it's distributed, those are very, very large conversations that we need to have about how is it going to impact, because when you adjust one, it affects everybody else. And that fund can go up and down depending on the 3-year running balance. So it's something I think worth looking into, but I guess I can't answer without looking at the dollars and cents and seeing really what the adjustments would do. So I think there's been a lot of talk about how we can support other communities. Mm-hmm. LGA is always a conversation there. One good thing for our townships right now, though, is we did get a lot of township funding at the end of last session. So hopefully that's going to be helping moving forward. But I guess I appreciate the idea. I can look into that, absolutely.
Well, the townships are they don't have enough money for their roads. Mm-hmm. And that's what's probably pushes this question. It's one thing I've learned down here in St. Paul is the amount of dollars that we, the state, gives to the township to manage the roads is not even close to what they need. Mm-hmm. And last year we had an opportunity to give more, and we didn't. We gave them some more, but not. I heard from all the townships that I represent, and they're just like, it wasn't enough. I'm like, well, it's never enough, but it really wasn't enough. If they want to use those dollars to work on the road, again, if you move that taconite tax around, which there is a bill now to offset property taxes, and even that gets scary because we don't know what the future is. We don't know if all the plants are going to keep operating. We don't know, and if it goes down, where do we get the money that we said we were going to do? So it's not that I don't want to. I mean, I would love to see the townships get a little more. The cities are, obviously more concentrated people, and but townships, if that's what they're going to need, then we need to bring it up more, or they do.
But it sounds like, at least for right now, there is no proposals out there to impact it in one way or another.
First I've heard of it.
Yeah. So let's stay on the topic of property taxes, because this is coming up on our show at least, because folks are getting statements in the mail in the last couple of weeks, and they ask questions of state legislators. And what is your role in property taxes? As we know, generally property taxes fund county, township, school district, city, and is really set on that level. But there is an interplay or byplay between the legislature and property taxes. You fund local government aid, county aid. We just talked about maybe some of this ambulance service funding. And so beyond what we talked about, is there anything else being considered that would impact property taxes from the state legislature this session? Representative Skraba, we'll start with you.
I'm not, again, I'm not on taxes, so I don't know what all the bills they're hearing. I'm not aware of anything right off of where my brain, I'm trying to think of, what have I heard other than me saying, if we're going to solve this ambulance problem, we're going to have to go to a per parcel something at some point. Whether we do or not depends on what the folks want, what people want. Do they want better service, or do they want to save money? So.
I don't think there's as much this year. There was quite a bit done last year. We increased the homestead amount by quite a bit. The property tax return by the state of Minnesota was also increased. Those are things that are going to help. But we're seeing a very unique time, especially here in northern Minnesota. I mean, this is something when I came into the legislature in 2021 was just starting to pick up. I mean, Itasca County, St. Louis County, Aiken counties, those were in the top 4 for highest property valuation increase in the state. The average valuation increase in Itasca County alone was 29%. So unfortunately with that comes increased property taxes. And I think this is a unique time to be able to tell those listening that this isn't, the county doesn't look at it and say, oh, there's more money to be made here. They, by statute, have to tax at 90 to 105% of that property's value. So they have to increase with it. Now, I think our counties are doing as good a job they can to stabilize their levies so that hopefully people aren't seeing those increases. But we need to talk about more of a long-term solution. And I'm still trying to work with stakeholders. Because again, this is a conversation that the state plays a role, but this is a lot of local government. This is counties and our municipalities. And it's finding a way where we can work at that to stabilize these valuations and these property taxes so we're not pushing people out of their homes. And it's not going to be sustainable, right? Because sure, that valuation might have went up 29%, but now your prime rate for a mortgage is 7%. So is that house really going to sell for that new valuation? And the answer is probably not. But then how do we get that valuation to a point where we're not going to be removing people from their homes because they can't afford the taxes? So I'm hoping some of the things we passed last year are going to be a help, but the work's not done yet, and I'm still working with stakeholders, and I encourage those people that are reaching out to keep in touch with your legislators on it, because this is a conversation where we need to partner on to find a good solution.
This legislative session, changing gears a bit, is focused, as we discussed, on the capital investment bill and then policy, or policy focused. Both of you sit on either energy, environment, or economic development committees, and one of the topics that tends to come up, especially in northeastern Minnesota, is permits and permit reform. Are we seeing any movement on that, or any proposals that either of you would like to discuss that have a chance of passing this session? We'll start with you, Representative Igo.
Yeah, so I mean, there's definitely a conversation to be had. This thing that really all of us in northern Minnesota have been working on for years to get to this point. So Minnesota Chamber did a great report with Bar Engineering that came out that kind of laid out a good framework to work with. So right now there's a couple bills moving. I've had one of them in front of me that I'll talk about right now. And that was one that was actually strictly just related to energy permitting. So really, if we looked at what was on that, the streamlining, cleaning it up, making sure that we don't have 5-7 year waits, honestly, stuff we can all support. The problem that I had with the bill, and then I'm actually actively working on trying to change, is it only was for 3 things. It was for solar, wind, and transmission projects. So the conversation I'm trying to have right now is, why do we need to pick winners and losers with this permitting solution? And I was just with a group last week talking about it. I said, even as it applies to solar, what good is permitting a solar project if the manufacturer making the solar panels can't get permitted? This is a larger conversation. So I know between the House and the Senate, there's an amendment working around right now that we're trying to make it apply to everybody. And those have all made deadlines, so that's going to be well alive here as we go into the end of session. But it's really finding a way that we make sure that permitting is going to apply to everybody. And the conversation we also need to have with that is, permitting is not just for that business or that manufacturer that wants to build something. It's for the community that's waiting, right? Look at New Range, right? Those folks have been waiting over 20 years now for a mine. we got to keep permitting in mind that it's not just for the business, it's for the community that's going to be affected by it. And I think that's how we can be effective in getting this permitting conversation larger than just the 3 industries that I mentioned.
And so currently, though, when we talk about permitting reform, are we talking about shorter timelines, defined timelines? What exactly is
That's the
reform?
big stuff, is shorter timelines, deadlines. The old mantra is used, so the project or the permit doesn't end up in the bottom desk drawer and get forgotten about for 4 years. It's setting good transparency so that not only can the public follow the project, but the project actually can move forward through the process so it is fair. And states all around us are doing this. And Minnesota's losing out. I mean, just my district in 7A alone, if you count up over the last 5 years the amount of projects that have had to leave now due to permitting problems, it's near almost $2 billion in lost capital investment to House District 7A alone.
And so what is, and we'll get to you in a second,
That's
Representative
fine.
Skraba,
No worry.
what is kind of the pinch point there? Is it staffing? Is it having more definition? What is the actual pinch point that you see is happening in either slowing these permits down or having uncertainty?
Yeah, so I think the transparency and having the deadlines things is a part of it. One of the larger parts of it, however, I think is just how litigation in the courts have impacted the permitting process. The amount of times where if there's something filed in litigation, that's going to stop the permit or it's going to stop comment. Or one of the other things we're seeing a lot is the Department of Natural Resources or the Minnesota Pollution Control Agency will issue a permit, and then that permit will get tied up in a court case. And now those agencies who have done work for maybe 2-3 years to get a good permit out that's following Minnesota regulations have to spend the next 2 to 3 years defending the work they did. In the meantime, all the other stuff they should be working on has been put on the back burner. So I think the larger conversation after we get through this first part is to figure out how can we find that happy medium of we don't want to take away the public's input and the power of the courts, but we got to find a way that you can't litigate something in perpetuity. States like Michigan are doing this, so it's not even a partisan thing. We got to find a way that projects can go through the process but not be killed by the judicial system.
Representative Skraba, what do you want to add to this conversation?
Same. We're on the same bills. I mean, literally. And the next permit, I'm sure the question will come up, anything about helium?
Not seeing anything yet,
Okay.
but if you want to talk about that as it relates.
There is a bill that was introduced, Senator Hochschild, Representative Liz Lagarde, and I'm getting on it on Monday. It just got put in on Friday for working towards permitting for the helium.
Can you talk a bit about helium found in
So the
here?
helium was found in Lake County, south and east of Babbitt, and a rather large amount. It's not so much amount, that the concentration, 13.8%. Most helium in the United States right now is garnished from natural gas, with 0.3 to 1, not even 1%. This is 13%. So it's way higher. And our helium has nitrogen and carbon dioxide, commercial grade carbon dioxide. So the stuff that makes soda pop and stuff like that. So we don't know how much is there. There are no rules for it.
For permitting
For nothing.
of any of these sorts of resources.
No, it's never been, and we're kind of working with the DNR, MPC, Department of Natural Resources, MPCA, all the permitting agencies. Joe Henderson from the DNR has spearheaded. They wrote a bill, and it's been introduced, so it has a chance. We have legs on it still. It was heard. I think it was heard in the Senate, or it's going to be heard, so that it has legs. We can still get it through this session, but it's never been done, so we don't know. And they want to also include the sequestration of CO2 into the ground. We're fortunate in northern Minnesota to have olivine in it, and CO2 and olivine make hydrogen, power, energy. We've got a pretty good opportunity to do this. So everybody's working behind the scenes to get this. The environmental groups have been in my office. I've talked to them, and I'm like, guys, gals, we need a win. We need to show northern Minnesota can do this and do it right. can you work with us instead of fighting us all the time? So we're trying to work together. I mean, I'm telling you and everybody, so there's no non-transparency here. A lot of times you don't want to let too much out, but it's like, no, I want everything out. I want everyone to know that we're all working together and that this isn't going to be a catastrophe to the environment. I mean, it's like, it's going to be good for northern Minnesota because, again, helium is used in MRI. When you go to the doctor, you need helium to do an MRI. You need helium to make computer chips. It freezes down and makes it cold, and you can work on it. We're working on a bill in the legislature to capture all the e-waste and all the platinum, palladium, gold, precious metals that are in chips. If we can do that in Minnesota and get the helium from Minnesota, we can make those chips in Minnesota. The President of the United States wants to make chips in the United States. We have all the stuff here. We can do it if we all work together. I mean, everything is combined. Instead of fighting it and saying no, 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 let's try to find some and say yes, and let's work together. So,
and it sounds like in the absence, if this hasn't been permitted before, if there's no law, the agencies will have to kind of develop it on their own, which potentially could cause more litigation. So if you all are involved in passing laws and giving some structure, it can, back to Representative Vigo's point, maybe have some more sustainability or certainty for what a process can be. Am I understanding that correctly?
And that's what's happening right now. Yep. What's happening now is the agencies want 2 years to get this done. Mm-hmm. We're saying, okay, we'll give you 2 years. Lake County Board's been very active in this. They're really good stewards. They want to make sure. They also see the value of the royalties. If there is a production, if we do take the helium and the CO2 out of the ground, and we produce it here in Lake County, it also helps Minnesota. I mean, it's a win for everyone, and if we don't know how big the find is, that's what we're trying to determine, but if it is big, 20% of our helium right now is made all over the United States in little bits and pieces. We could make 20% here, and we would be that much less dependent on our helium from our outside sources. So.
And I just want to add to that. I mean, I think some people when they hear that we don't have anything on the books get kind of scared and what that could mean. I look at it through a positive lens because now we can look at how other states have done it. I mean, Minnesota's never had any gas extraction laws on its books in its history. So now we can look at this and do it right. And, Representative Skraba mentioned even the sequestering and putting that underground with the geology we have in Minnesota. This is kind of all teeing up Minnesota to become a circular economy based around natural resources, manufacturing, and recycling. And we're talking really high-paying jobs, and we're talking about bringing supply chains home and putting them right in the best state to do it. The state with an inland port, the state with rail, the state with the best workforce. And those kind of the larger conversations that are coming out of this helium find is, we could do a lot here. I mean, we didn't even really talk about it much as the state legislature. We put $500 million into something called the CHIPS Act, which is working with the federal government to bring microchip processing back to our shores. But that money we invested from the surplus is actually going to bring one of those projects right here to Minnesota. So now we could utilize the helium up on the North Shore and literally have that supply being building chips right here in Minnesota. So it's really exciting.
Unique opportunity. Keep those questions coming in by phone or by email, please. I want to talk about a couple of different topics here to change gears yet again. Housing is a big challenge and concern in many of our communities across the board, whether you're in urban Twin Cities, larger cities like we're sitting in Duluth here, and many of our rural communities as well. I know there was a historic funding for housing opportunities last legislative session, and this year around housing, it really seemed to focus. There was a big push by a group of folks who are on all sides of other issues to really look at housing criteria that happen in local communities. And so what they really wanted to do was supersede any local ordinances or local laws and allow for multi-unit housing to be developed in all communities in Minnesota. It received significant pushback, and I think it sounds like it's on the sidelines right now, but can you talk about your thoughts and ideas about either that effort or other things we need to do to address this housing crisis?
Go. So I'll start with it just because I actually signed on to the bill. And I signed on to the bill to have the conversation because we definitely need to do something about housing. And you are correct, the bill for the most part is probably on the back burner and will not happen this year, which again, it's a good thing. The legislature is supposed to move slow, and the reason it's on the back burner is because there was issues that arose that it's not going to move. And that's why I signed on the bill, is to have those conversations. But the point that we are getting at is, when we talk multifamily housing, that doesn't mean, a 6-story tall, apartment building. That could mean something as simple as a community as a split-level duplex for senior citizens. And we need to find a way to allow our builders to go out into communities and build homes, because we're 106 housing units down in the state of Minnesota. I mean, we could be building nonstop for the next 10 years and still not meet our goal. And when we talk about wanting to retain our population and grow our populations, housing is at the key part of that conversation. So again, I'm a proponent of local control. I think that's important. But if there's one good thing this bill has done, is it's raised an issue that we need to have partnerships with local communities, our builders, counties, and the state to find out how this is going to work, so that we're not running into roadblocks, or we're not running into increased costs, right? We have some cities that'll look at a building project and say, oh, there's $30,000 in permits and hookups to do there. Well, you just increased the cost of workforce housing by $30,000 that the builder's got to pass on. And that's also going to increase property values again. That's going to increase property taxes again. It's unsustainable if we don't do something. So I think the conversation's in a really good place, and I'm hoping to keep working on the legislation and the bill, which is bipartisan, and again, from multiple different groups, to find solution that we can move in the years to come.
He said 106,000. You said 106.
Oh, 106,000,
Yes.
yeah.
Units, short.
Units,
Short. We're short.
106,000 units, yeah.
Yeah. In, again, my opinion, state of Minnesota doesn't need to be in the zoning business. Please stay out of it. That's what they want to do. They want to run the zoning. Each city, each community, as a chairman of St. Louis County Planning Commission for 12 plus years, I don't want the state telling, they already control a lot. I don't think this is the place for them to do that. I think if they want to help housing, they need to get out of the way in some of the things they do. If a builder has a really fast track way of doing it and it's safe, let them go. Don't say, well, that's not how they do it in Mankato, or that's not how they do it in Moorhead or in Duluth. Well, each community has its own quirks, and each zone. I know the city of Two Harbors, and I don't know if it passed, but they were going to change the zoning in the city to you could build anything, anywhere, anytime. And it was kind of like, just we need more housing. If you can put a duplex in your backyard, go ahead, put it in. And it's kind of like, well, what about your neighbor? What if they didn't want that? And that's where this comes in. It's like we set aside in a planned community that type of development goes here, this goes here. Some people can argue that that's not working, and it's like, okay, how do we solve it? By having the state come in and say, you can't have rules anymore, we're going to set the rules. I'm sorry, I'm not in that camp. I can't even get in. I can't even get close to that camp. For me, that's just. And my eyes are open, my ears are open. I'm listening, but it's just like, oh, it's a big deal. Zoning is real personal. I mean, you try to do a conditional use permit or a variance, you can really, really get community going.
Yeah. Well, I'm hearing some local control philosophy from both of you here. Let's test that on a separate issue that was before and is before the legislature right now. Uber and Lyft. And so, it may not, you don't have a lot of Lyft and Uber probably going on in Wabana Township,
Nope.
even up in Ely.
Nope.
However, this is an issue that has come to bear for the state and state legislators to discuss, because the city of Minneapolis has local control, passed some provisions that they want to Lyft and Uber to comply, and Lyft and Uber said, if you pass these provisions, we're going to leave your community. So where this could potentially impact your constituents is when they're traveling to larger communities like Duluth or the Twin Cities. And so your thoughts and feelings about, should the state step in, Representative Skraba, and do something about this, or leave it up to the city of Minneapolis?
When the drivers came to the state legislature last year saying, you have to pass a bill to make Uber and Lyft pay us $60 an hour. That's what we're worth. And I'm like, that's not government's role. That is not our role. And they were adamant about it. And we finally just said, you know what, let the Senate deal with it. So we just let it through. The other side voted for it. The Democrats voted for it. It passed. And the Senate had it, and the Senate was like, and they were relentless. They were not going away. These drivers wanted their pound of flesh, and they were going to get it. from Uber and Lyft. Finally, the Senate said, okay, they passed it. They got to the governor, and the governor vetoed it, rightfully so. Government's place is not to tell a company how much they should pay their employees. That is not our role, in my opinion. I don't want the legislature to go to U.S. Steel saying, you know what, you need to pay them more money. Why? They're worth more money. We start doing that, where does it stop?
Well, we do have a minimum wage. So
yes.
we do.
Oh, no, I'm not, but this is different. To me, this is different. This is totally a different argument for me, So I'm looking at this now. Does the legislature have a responsibility to step in and go over the city of Minneapolis? I believe we do.
You were just arguing local control on the other issue. So what's the difference here?
The difference is this, exactly what you said. Public safety, public health. There are people in the metro area that don't have a car that need to get to the doctor. They use Uber and Lyft all the time, $7 from an apartment building to their doctor. Okay, for them to own a car would cost way more. I was just listening to a young woman on social media talk about how $7 gets her to work and back every day. And if she can't, she doesn't know how she's going to do it. And I'm like, wait a minute, this is way more than just a little issue. It's a big issue. It's a very big issue, and it needs to be addressed. The problem is, will it get to us? Will it get to the legislature? Representative Garofalo has taunted, pushed, tried to get Representative Long, Majority Leader, to let's sit down and start working this out. We don't need your help right now. We don't need your help. And it's kind of like, yeah, you do. And it's like, no, we don't. And it's like, so we'll see where we go with it.
Representative Michael, your thoughts on this?
Again, local control is incredibly important, and I think you need to look at that. But Representative Skraba kind of hit it right there. I mean, there's deep concerns for public safety, public health, the well-being of our state's largest city, right? I mean, there's people, that you're hearing about conferences that won't come anymore if there's no Uber and Lyft. What do you do for people that are going to concerts and shows and downtown if they can't get rides in and out? Elderly, young people, there's a huge concern here about losing that ride share ability. So the state right now, we're having a conversation in the legislature, just do preemption. Just say, the city of Minneapolis can't do this. And I think there's just some internal struggle going on about trying to figure out how do you solve this issue. And I can hear about making sure that people get paid money. That's like I said, why we have a minimum wage. But you also have to look at what the root of Uber and Lyft is. It's a 1099 job that people work in their free time. It was never meant to become a career. And I think as that's being shaped and molded, we need to have larger conversations that you can't just have a local government step in and turn a job that's provided by a company into what you want it to be. Because again, that's another slippery slope mentality that Representative Skraba hit. Where do you start and stop at that? So I'm hoping we can bring some stability to that. Again, it's not a partisan issue at all. This will be a bipartisan solution to step in and fix this issue.
We have just a few more minutes left, and we do have one more question from a viewer. Can you please help the legislature do more interagency efforts? Some states have interagency departments. I think it can save money and help people and be efficient. So interagency efforts, are you familiar with any that are going on? Are there any ways to encourage more of that work? Who'd like to take first swing at this?
I could try, the DNR, I'm talking to Bob Myers every week,
And Bob Myers is their legislative liaison?
No, he's the assistant DNR commissioner.
Okay.
Under Sarah Stroman, the DNR commissioner. And whenever I have issues, I always come to him. And they work with MPCA, Minnesota Pollution Control Agency, on permitting issues. So they do work together. Now, if the questioner is saying, do they work together, like drive to meetings together and that, I don't know. It's government. I couldn't answer that question.
Okay.
I'll say, I think there's some things happening. Unfortunately, there's so many changes in the last legislative session with the increase in budgets and all that happened around that. So I think a lot of the agencies right now are struggling to implement everything that happened. We're finding a lot of issues that still need to get fixed at the end of this session. So I agree with the viewer, because we have to find a way to limit that government spend, because we're in a deficit right now, a structural deficit going into budget next year. So I mean, finding ways to save money is going to be crucial right now. So that's a conversation that I've actually had with commissioners too, is how can we find ways to work together, cut costs, because taxpayers just can't bear it. So the viewer's 100% right.
Final question. Governor gave his State of the State address a couple of weeks ago, and he qualified that the state of the state is strong. And he gave many reasons he felt like the state of Minnesota is strong. In a sentence or two, what do you think the state of the state is? Representative Igo, we'll go with you first.
State of the state right now, I think, is uncertain because there's so much that's happened that has led to be really come in front of people. The increase in all these taxes, the increase in our budget, it's all coming to a T soon. So I think people are kind of holding their breath to see what that's going to mean, and we're going to need to come together and fix those things in the years to come.
Representative Skraba, last word for you.
Ask the families that have to pay 26% more for their food. Ask the families that have to pay 20% more for gas. Ask the families that have to pay more for everything and say, hey, it's great. Everything is great. I don't think it's great. I think we need to do a better job.
Wonderful. Well, I appreciate you both being with us here today, and thank you for the work that you do. I think you're both headed back down to St. Paul right after this.
Right now.
And you've got about a little more than a month to go. Yeah, all right. Yep. Well, we are out of time, and I'd like to thank Representatives Skraba and Igo for joining us here this evening, answering questions and sharing their thoughts. We will be back again next Sunday at 5 to speak with more members of the state legislature and answer more of your questions. Thank you for watching, and to the viewers at home for calling and writing in with your questions. You're playing a vital part in our representative government system. For the team here at PBS North, I'm Tony Sertich. Have a great evening.